Imagine going to sleep in one country and waking up in another. No war, no vote, no warning, just a new flag outside your window. Sounds impossible, right? It actually happened, more than once.
Today, we're looking at real places that switched nationality overnight and the strange, sometimes hilarious consequences for the people who lived there.
How did you do that?
Let's start with one of history's most tossed-around regions, Alsace-Lorraine. Between 1871 and 1945, this strip of land between France and Germany changed hands 4 times. Locals had to switch their language, their school curriculum, even their names, all without moving an inch.
Some grandparents were born French, became German, became French again, and died German citizens, all in the same house. So why this 74-year game of geopolitical ping pong? Because Alsace-Lorraine was the ultimate trophy of European ego. The land sat right on the border of Europe's 2 fiercest rivals, France and Germany. Most locals spoke a Germanic dialect, but they identified as culturally French. To Germany, owning the region was proof of imperial power. To France, losing it was a deep scar to national pride. Every time a war broke out, the border moved. Germany seized it in 1871 to flex its new empire. France took it back after World War I in 1919 out of revenge. Hitler violently annexed it again in 1940, only for the Allies to return it to France in 1945. For the superpowers, it was a point of pride. But for the people living there, they were just civilians caught in a giant tug-of-war, forced to rewrite their entire identities every time the winds of war changed. Now fast forward to July 1st, 1997. At exactly midnight, Hong Kong stopped being British and became Chinese, live, on television, in front of the whole world. 1 minute, people were under the Union Jack. The next, under a new flag entirely. It's one of the only times in history a handover was scheduled down to the second. How do you just hand over a massive, booming capitalist metropolis like a borrowed library book? It all started 150 years earlier, with a series of 19th century agreements, most notably the 1898 Convention of Peking. Britain had forced China's Qing dynasty to sign a 99-year lease on Hong Kong's new territories. To the British Empire back then, 99 years felt like forever. But time eventually ran out. By the 1980s, the expiration date was looming. China, now under communist rule, made it clear they wanted the territory back, and Britain couldn't practically keep Hong Kong without the leased land. So, they struck a deal called One Country, Two Systems. China promised that even though Hong Kong would officially belong to them, the city would get to keep its capitalist economy, legal system, and freedoms for at least another 50 years. That midnight countdown wasn't just a dramatic TV moment. It was the exact second a century-old colonial lease expired, officially launching one of the biggest political experiments in modern history. In 2014, Crimea, a peninsula on the Black Sea, shifted from Ukrainian to Russian control after a disputed referendum, a change most of the world still doesn't recognize as legitimate. Overnight, residents needed new passports, new currency, and new postal codes, even though their houses hadn't moved a single meter. To understand how a peninsula gets swept up overnight, you have to look at its complicated history. Crimea had actually been part of Russia for centuries, but in 1954, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev made a surprise move and gifted the peninsula to Ukraine. At the time, both Russia and Ukraine were part of the same country, the Soviet Union, so the swap was mostly just a symbolic, administrative gesture. It didn't change much for the people living there. But when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, that symbolic border suddenly became a real international boundary.
Crimea was now officially inside an independent Ukraine, even though the majority of its population remained ethnically Russian, and Russia kept its vital Black Sea naval fleet stationed right there.
Fast forward to early 2014, when a massive political revolution in Ukraine ousted its pro-Russian president. Moscow saw it as a direct threat to its security and influence. Russian forces quickly moved in to occupy the peninsula, hastily organized a referendum, and annexed Crimea.
For Russia, it was about reclaiming what they saw as historic territory and securing their naval stronghold. But for Ukraine and the international community, it was a flagrant violation of borders, turning Crimea into a modern geopolitical limbo where everyday life was rewritten by force.
But here's where it gets weird. In the town of Baarle, the border between Belgium and the Netherlands doesn't just cross fields, it cuts through actual houses.
Some families have their kitchen in one country and their bedroom in another. And get this, in one case, the border shifted just a few feet, and an elderly woman suddenly found her house was no longer in Belgium.
Her solution? She swapped her front door with a window next to it. Since the rule says your nationality depends on where your front door is, she just moved her country back by rearranging her wall.
How on earth did a town end up looking like a puzzle with missing pieces? You can blame a series of incredibly messy real estate deals from the Middle Ages. Back in the late 1100s, local dukes and counts loved trading, gambling, and swapping tiny plots of land. One ruler would give away a field but keep the house on it. Another would buy a meadow but leave the paths public. When Belgium split from the Netherlands centuries later, they tried to draw a clean border. But the land ownership was so tangled up that they simply gave up. Instead of drawing a straight line, they officially mapped out 30 separate pockets of land, enclaves within enclaves. Today, the town is split into Baarle-Nassau, Dutch, and Baarle-Hertog, Belgian. It creates the ultimate legal loophole town. For decades, if Dutch law said restaurants had to close early, owners would literally move their tables to the Belgian side of the dining room to keep serving.
While the rest of the world fights bloody wars over borders, the people of Baarle just treat theirs like a minor architectural inconvenience, proving that sometimes history is just plain ridiculous. Lines on a map are treated as permanent, immovable truths. But history shows they're often just accidents of timing, sketched out in quiet rooms by people who will never have to live with the consequences.
Because at the end of the day, a border isn't just a line in the dirt. It's a human story. And the next time you look at a world map, just remember, the ground beneath your feet hasn't changed, but the story of who owns it is always being written.